Welcome to Module 5 on adolescence, one of the most dynamic and misunderstood periods of the human lifespan. In this presentation, we explore physical and cognitive changes that define the adolescent years. But we won't stop at textbook descriptions. We'll integrate current neuroscience research, cross-cultural perspectives on puberty and development, and a neurodiversity-affirming lens throughout. As counselors in training, your role is not just to learn what happens during adolescence, but to understand how these developmental processes interact with identity, culture, systems, and the lived experience of the young people you will serve. Let's begin. Before we dive in, I want to invite you to pause and reflect on your own adolescent experience. What do you remember most vividly? Was it a growth spurt that made you feel awkward? A moment when your thinking shifted? How did the adults around you respond to those changes? Were they affirming, dismissive, anxious? Your own developmental story shapes how you will sit with adolescent clients. The counselor who has reflected on their own adolescence is better equipped to hold space for a teen navigating theirs. Take a moment with these questions before we move forward. Let's begin with physical development. We'll cover puberty as a process, the hormonal systems driving it, and how culture and neurodivergence shape the experience. Physical development is not just biology. It is deeply intertwined with identity and the social world. Puberty is a process, not a single event. It begins when the hypothalamus activates the pituitary gland, which stimulates the gonads to produce sex hormones. This cascade, called the HPG axis, sets off changes unfolding over 3 to 5 years. These include the development of primary sex characteristics, such as reproductive organs, and secondary sex characteristics, such as breast development, facial hair, changes in body composition, and the growth spurt. There is enormous variation in when puberty begins, how quickly it progresses, and in the order in which changes occur. This is critical for counselors, because adolescents are constantly comparing themselves to peers. A child who develops earlier or later than classmates may feel isolated, ashamed, or confused. The secular trend indicates that puberty is starting earlier than a century ago, with average menarche around age 12 to 13, but significant variation across racial, ethnic, and geographic groups. As counselors, consider: what messages are we sending young people about their changing bodies? Is puberty framed as something to survive, or as a natural unfolding? Pubertal timing is shaped by the interaction of genetics, environment, and lived experience. Genetics is the strongest single predictor. Twin studies show that 50 to 80% of variation is heritable. But environment matters deeply. One of the most significant research findings is that children in stressful environments tend to enter puberty earlier. This is consistent with life history theory, which suggests that when the environment signals unpredictability, the body accelerates reproductive maturation as an adaptive response. Think about Elena Rivera Thompson. She has already experienced multiple ACEs by age 4: NICU stay, maternal depression and grief, parental separation, and maternal hospitalization. If Elena enters puberty earlier than her peers, that is not random. It may be her body responding to cumulative stress. As counselors, we don't pathologize this. We understand it. Nutrition and body composition also play a role, with higher body fat correlated with earlier puberty, particularly for girls. This table summarizes hormonal changes and sex characteristics for female and male development. For females, puberty typically begins around age 9 to 10 with breast budding. Menarche occurs around 12 to 13, though fertility does not begin immediately. It takes months to years after menarche for ovulation to become regular. For males, the onset is around 11 to 11.5 with testicular enlargement, followed by penis growth, and seminarche around 13. Voice deepening, facial hair, and increases in muscle mass come later. Remember, these are averages with enormous individual variation. For neurodivergent adolescents, These hormonal changes don't happen in isolation from existing neurological profiles. Research from Groneman and colleagues in 2024 found that autistic adolescents may experience puberty as particularly destabilizing, intensifying sensory sensitivities and emotional dysregulation. A 2025 scoping review on puberty and ADHD similarly found that individuals with ADHD may experience puberty differently from neurotypical peers. Culture profoundly shapes the experience of puberty. In collectivist cultures, puberty may signal increased family responsibility rather than independence. Many indigenous cultures mark puberty with ceremonies that honor the transition and transmit values. The Apache Sunrise Ceremony and the quinceañera are examples of puberty as a communal celebration, not just a biological event. Cross-cultural research challenges Western assumptions about body image, too. Mahama and colleagues found significant cultural variation in how puberty affected body image across Ghana and Kenya. As counselors, we must ask, whose norms are we using when we assess an adolescent's relationship with their body? Shame-based language creates shame-based relationships with the body. As counselors, we can model language that is accurate, affirming, and inclusive. This includes being mindful that not all adolescents experience puberty in ways that align with their gender identity. For transgender and gender-diverse youth, puberty can be a time of profound distress. Our language needs to hold space for all experiences. Body image is a significant challenge in adolescence. Girls tend to become less satisfied as body fat increases. Boys' satisfaction tends to increase with muscle mass. We need to expand beyond the textbook. A 2024 review by Cobert and colleagues found neurodivergent individuals face elevated eating disorder risk due to sensory sensitivities, interoception challenges, and masking pressures. Boys remain underdiagnosed because eating disorders are stereotyped as female conditions. LGBTQ+ youth face compounding risks. Counselors need to screen broadly. Now we turn to cognitive development. Neuroscience has transformed our understanding of adolescence. Thanks to the landmark ABCD study, which followed over 11,000 young people, we know that adolescence is one of the most significant periods of brain reorganization in the lifespan. The adolescent brain is not a broken adult brain. It is under active, purposeful construction. 4 key processes are at work. First, synaptic pruning and formation. For decades, the dominant narrative was that the adolescent brain primarily prunes unused connections. But a groundbreaking 2026 study from Kyushu University discovered that the brain also creates dense new synaptic clusters, called hotspots, that form only during adolescence. When this process was disrupted in animal models, it mimicked features of schizophrenia. So adolescent brain development is about building new connections in the right places, not just losing old ones. Second, myelination increases neural communication speed dramatically as white matter tracks are coated in myelin. The corpus callosum thickens, improving integration across hemispheres. Third, the prefrontal cortex continues developing into the mid-20s. Neuroscientist B.J. Casey reframes this not as a deficit, but as an extended window of environmental adaptation. The brain stays plastic longer to be shaped by experience. Fourth, limbic cortical asynchrony means the emotional brain matures before the regulatory brain, explaining why teens reason well when calm, but struggle under emotional arousal. This is neurodevelopment, not a character flaw. Think of the adolescent brain as a house under renovation. The wiring is being upgraded, walls are moving, and some rooms are temporarily out of service. The construction is purposeful, and the outcome is a more capable brain. This metaphor, adapted from Steinberg, helps parents and teachers move from asking what is wrong with this kid to asking what is being built.
Piaget described adolescence as the entry into formal operational thinking, abstract reasoning, hypothesis testing, and metacognition. Adolescents can understand irony, sarcasm, and analogy, detect inconsistencies,
and become more reflective. But not all adolescents reach formal operations, and those who do may not use these capacities consistently. Piaget's framework reflects a Western, academic cognitive style. Cross-cultural research suggests formal operational thinking is more common in societies with formal schooling, but other cultures develop relational reasoning, ecological intelligence, and practical wisdom that are equally sophisticated but unmeasured by Piaget's tasks. For neurodivergent adolescents, metacognition may develop unevenly. Research by Weil and colleagues found that metacognitive abilities improve throughout adolescence, but remain highly variable. A teen with ADHD might reason brilliantly in a high-interest area, but struggle to monitor their own learning in less engaging subjects. This variability has real implications for study strategies and self-regulated learning. The information processing perspective focuses on the mechanics of cognitive change. Working memory expands, processing speed increases with myelination, selective attention improves, and long-term memory becomes more sophisticated across declarative, procedural, and conceptual domains. For counselors, this means adolescent clients can engage in cognitively demanding therapeutic approaches like Socratic questioning, cognitive restructuring, and narrative therapy. This is an exciting window for clinical work. Elkin described 3 forms of adolescent egocentrism that emerge as abstract thinking develops. The imaginary audience is the belief that everyone is watching you. The teen convinced the entire cafeteria noticed their bad hair day is experiencing this. Clinically, it drives social anxiety, appearance obsession, and social media hypervigilance, where every post is performed for an imagined critical audience. The personal fable is the belief that your experience is uniquely intense and that no one else can understand it. It can fuel both risk-taking and beautiful, poetic self-expression. The invincibility fable is the belief you're immune from consequences, contributing to substance experimentation and reckless behavior. For counselors, understanding egocentrism is crucial. The teen who seems dramatic or self-absorbed is often expressing a developmentally normal cognitive pattern, not a character flaw. Our job is to validate the intensity of their experience while gently broadening their perspective. Kohlberg described 3 moral reasoning levels: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. Most adolescents operate at the conventional level, caring about social expectations and rules. But Kohlberg's model privileges Western individualistic reasoning. Gilligan argued it undervalues care-based morality. From indigenous perspectives, morality is grounded in relational responsibility to land, community, and ancestors. These are not lower levels of reasoning. They are entirely different moral frameworks. The social brain network, including the medial prefrontal cortex and temporal parietal junction, undergoes major reorganization during adolescence, making teens exquisitely sensitive to peer feedback. Social media activates the same neural reward circuits as face-to-face peer acceptance. Likes, comments, and shares function as social feedback that the adolescent brain is neurologically primed to attend to. The combination of heightened emotional sensitivity and still developing reflective processing makes teens particularly reactive to emotionally arousing online content. But I want to be balanced here. Digital spaces can also provide community, identity exploration, and belonging, particularly for youth marginalized in their offline environments, including LGBTQ+ youth, neurodivergent youth, and youth of color. The counselor's role is not to demonize technology, but to help adolescents develop awareness of how digital environments affect their emotional and social selves. Now let's examine how physical and cognitive changes play out in schools, the primary environment where adolescents spend their time. 4 factors drive adolescent achievement. First, school environment. Students achieve better in safe schools with structure, emotional support, high-quality teachers, and high expectations held with warmth. Second, peer influence shapes academic identity more powerfully than most adults realize.
Friends influence homework completion and effort more than parents and teachers. When a teen's peer group values engagement, the teen engages. When the norm is to disengage, even a motivated student may pull back. Third, academic self-efficacy. The belief that one can succeed is built through mastery experiences, not hollow praise. Fourth, cultural context. Research by Q in 2023 found that cultural stereotypes of adolescence predict academic trajectory. U.S. youth who viewed adolescence as a time of irresponsibility showed greater declines in engagement than Chinese youth who viewed it as a time of increased family responsibility. This suggests adolescent development is driven partly by social constructions of this phase. The language of dropout locates the problem in the student, as though leaving school is a personal failure. But what we call dropping out is often more accurately described as being pushed out. School push-out is driven by systemic factors: funding inequities, zero-tolerance disciplinary policies that disproportionately target students of color, curricula that don't reflect diverse identities, and inadequate support for learning differences. For neurodivergent students without adequate accommodations, disengagement is not about lacking ability. It is about a system that was not designed for them. Students who drop out are more likely to live in poverty, be unemployed, and be involved in the criminal justice system. As counselors, particularly school counselors, we are positioned to advocate for systemic change. The question should not be why this student dropped out, but what the system failed to provide. Recent research is moving toward a transdiagnostic perspective on neurodivergence. A 2025 study by Michelini and colleagues found that individual profiles across dimensions of functioning are more clinically meaningful than categorical labels. ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and dyscalculia show significant overlapping executive function challenges. Puberty amplifies existing neurodevelopmental profiles, intensifying sensory sensitivities, emotional dysregulation, and executive function challenges. Neurodivergent adolescents show elevated rates of depression and anxiety compared to neurotypical peers. One pathway may be the accumulation of negative academic feedback, in which repeatedly receiving messages of falling short erodes confidence and fuels internalizing symptoms. We must attend to masking and late identification, particularly in girls, BIPOC youth, and twice exceptional students who compensate for years at significant cost to their well-being. The question is not what disorder does this adolescent have, but what does their neurodevelopmental profile look like, and what supports do they need? Let's integrate everything through Elena's case. Given her ACE history, pubertal timing may be accelerated. Her family's ADHD history and existing attentional and sensory patterns will interact with adolescent brain reorganization. Some challenges may intensify, but some capacities may also strengthen. The imaginary audience takes on extra weight when you are visibly different from peers and one of the few bicultural students in a predominantly white school. Maya's Mexican-American cultural values of emotional closeness and collectivism will frame Elena's adolescence differently than Daniel's emphasis on independence and restraint. A counselor could help bridge these perspectives, and crucially, we must not overlook Elena's strengths. Her imaginative play, empathic capacity, bicultural identity, and stable friendships are all protective factors. Development is about resilience, not just risk. Your task as counselors is to hold the full picture. 5 key takeaways. Normalize brain development so families stop seeing impulsivity as a character flaw. Leverage cognitive growth with sophisticated therapeutic approaches. Attend to cultural context and avoid applying Western norms universally. Screen broadly for neurodivergence, especially in populations that are often identified late. And address systemic barriers through advocacy, not just individual intervention. Here are the key terms from this module for your comps and NCE preparation. Practice not just defining these terms but connecting them to clinical scenarios. How would you explain synaptic pruning to a worried parent? How might the imaginary audience show up in a session with a 13-year-old? These are the key references cited throughout. I encourage you to explore the neuroscience papers by Casey, Crone, and Baker, the cross-cultural work by Gibbons, Polker, and Q, and the neurodivergence-focused research by Groneman and Michelini. Adolescence is not a problem to be solved. It is a phase of development to be understood, supported, and honored. The adolescents you will work with are people in the middle of one of the most remarkable developmental transformations in the lifespan. Your job as a counselor is to meet adolescents with curiosity, cultural humility, and a deep understanding of the science behind it. Thank you for your engagement. I look forward to our discussions.